Let's stop dancing around this and just say it plain because history is not a mystery, and it's definitely not up for debate based on feelings or politics. Native people were here first. Full stop. Living on this land long before any colonizers showed up, building communities, cultures, languages, systems of trade, raising families, and existing in ways that were already complete without needing to be discovered by anyone. And then colonizers came in, not as peaceful guests, but as people looking to take control and profit. And what happened next wasn't some harmless meeting of worlds like people try to dress it up as. It was violence, displacement, broken treaties, stolen land, forced removal, cultural erasure, and death on a massive scale. And yeah, that word matters because when whole populations are wiped out, pushed off their land, stripped of identity, and treated like they don't matter, that's not just history. That's harm that echoes all the way into today. So when people ask, who is the victim? It's not complicated unless someone is trying really hard to avoid the truth. Native communities were and still are deeply affected by what colonization did. And no, that doesn't mean every single person today is personally guilty for the past. But it does mean we don't get to pretend it didn't happen or that the impact just magically disappeared. And let's talk about slavery too, because people love to downplay that part like it's separate or less important. Colonizers absolutely profited off slavery. That's not opinion. That's documented fact. Entire economies were built on the forced labor of enslaved people. People were treated like property, families torn apart, bodies used for profit, and wealth was generated from that system that didn't just vanish. It got passed down, reinvested, and shaped the world we're still living in right now. So when someone tries to act like all of this is just old history, that doesn't matter anymore. It honestly feels like a way to avoid responsibility for understanding how we got here, because you can't fix anything if you refuse to acknowledge what broke in the first place. And this isn't about guilt trips or blaming random people today. It's about honesty. It's about recognizing that the foundation of this country includes both achievement and harm, and ignoring one side doesn't make it disappear. It just keeps people stuck in denial. And if we actually care about fairness, equality, and moving forward, then we have to be real about the past. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges the version of history we were taught, because growth doesn't come from pretending everything was fine. It comes from facing the truth, learning from it, and doing better, and that starts with listening, not shutting people down. Not rewriting facts to feel better, but actually hearing the voices of the people whose history this really is. Because at the end of the day, you can't change what happened, but you can choose whether you respect the truth or keep running from it. People really need to slow down and separate facts from straight-up distortion, because when groups like the KKK try to paint themselves as victims or flip the narrative to say Native people enslaved them, that's not some hidden truth finally being revealed. That's a tactic. And it's been used over and over in history. Take real, documented harm and then twist it just enough to confuse people who don't want to dig deeper. And yeah, were there different forms of conflict and even captivity between some native groups and others before and during colonization? Absolutely. Human history is complicated and not perfect anywhere, but trying to compare that to the massive, organized, race-based system of chattel slavery created and expanded by European colonizers is not just inaccurate. It's misleading on purpose, because the scale, the structure, and the intent were completely different. One was not a global system designed to permanently dehumanize entire races of people and build generational wealth off their bodies, and the other was exactly that. And when the KKK pushes this, we're the real victims. Angle, it's not about truth. It's about avoiding accountability and trying to rewrite history into something that makes their ideology seem justified, which it isn't, and never has been, and it also plays into something deeper. This need to feel threatened or wronged so they can defend hate as if it's self-protection, when in reality the historical record shows who held power, who made the laws, who benefited economically, and who suffered the most under those systems. And it wasn't the KKK or the people they claimed to represent. And honestly, if someone has to twist history that hard to make their point, that should tell you everything you need to know, because truth doesn't need that kind of manipulation to stand on its own. And acknowledging that doesn't mean ignoring complexity or pretending every group in history was perfect. It just means refusing to accept false equivalencies that are designed to confuse people and keep harmful ideas alive. And if we actually care about reality, not just comfort, then we have to call that out for what it is: misinformation dressed up as victimhood. No, the KKK is not perfect for America. And no, they are not about freedom. And honestly, even asking that question should make people pause and really look at what that group actually stands for instead of what they try to claim. Because the Ku Klux Klan was built on the idea that some people are better than others based on race and religion, and that those they see as less than should be controlled, excluded, or erased from power. And that's the complete opposite of freedom. Real freedom means everyone gets to exist, speak, live, and pursue their life without being threatened or pushed down because of who they are. And the KKK's entire history is tied to intimidation. Violence and fear, not liberty, not equality, not justice, and definitely not anything that lines up with what most people believe America should be about. And yeah, they love to wrap themselves in words like heritage or protection or rights. But when you peel that back, what they're really protecting is a system where only certain people have full rights and everyone else is expected to stay in their place. And that's not freedom, that's control, and history shows that clearly. From targeting Black communities, after slavery, to opposing civil rights, to spreading hate toward anyone who doesn't fit their narrow view, they have consistently stood against progress that expands rights to more people. And you can't claim to be about freedom while actively working to limit it for others. That's not how it works, and it's not about politics or opinions at that point. It's about basic facts and values, so no, the KKK isn't some misunderstood group fighting for liberty. They're a group that has repeatedly fought against it, and if we're being real, a country that wants to move forward, grow, and actually live up to its ideals doesn't need organizations built on division and hate. It needs honesty, accountability, and a commitment to making sure freedom actually applies to everyone, not just a select few. What the KKK has pushed as Christianity is not the same thing as the Christianity most people recognize or try to live by. It's a twisted version that they've bent to fit their own beliefs about race, power, and control. And that's the part people need to be honest about instead of pretending it's all one thing. Because at the core of Christianity, the actual teachings that people point to, you're talking about love your neighbor, care for the vulnerable, treat people with dignity, humility, forgiveness, all of that, and none of that lines up with hate, intimidation, or the idea that one group of people is superior to another. But the KKK took religious language and symbols and used them like a cover, like a way to justify what they already wanted to believe, and that's something humans have done in different ways throughout history. Using religion to back up power instead of letting it challenge them to be better. And when you look at it honestly, their version is built on exclusion, fear, and identity politics. Not compassion, not equality, not any real sense of moral accountability, and that's a huge difference. Because one is trying, even if imperfectly, to move toward love and justice, and the other is using the name of religion to hold on to division and control. And that's why it's dangerous to just lump it all together and say it's the same. Because it lets that distortion slide without being questioned, and it also unfairly puts every Christian in the same box as something they may not agree with at all, and nobody benefits from that kind of oversimplification. So no, it's not the same thing. One is a belief system that, at its best, calls people to treat others with respect and humanity, and the other is an ideology that used that label as a tool to justify hate. And those are two very different directions, no matter how similar the words might sound on the surface. The KKK is a threat, and not in some exaggerated, dramatic way people try to brush off, but in a very real, grounded way that comes from what they believe and what they've done over time. Because any group built on the idea that certain people are inferior and should be excluded, controlled, or pushed out is automatically in conflict with the idea of a free and equal society. And that's not opinion, that's just reality. America at its core claims to stand for freedom, equality, and rights for all, even if it hasn't always lived up to that. And the KKK's entire ideology pushes in the opposite direction. It promotes division, fear, and the idea that only a select group deserves full rights. And that creates tension, instability, and harm, not unity or progress. And when people ask if it's a threat to humanity, you have to zoom out and look at the bigger pattern, because this isn't just about one group in one country. It's about what happens whenever hate-based ideologies take root. History shows us over and over that when people start believing others are less human, it opens the door to discrimination, violence, and worse. And the KKK fits into that pattern clearly, even if its influence today isn't what it once was. The mindset behind it is still dangerous because it can spread, evolve, and show up in different forms if people stop paying attention. And that's the part people sometimes underestimate. It's not just about numbers or visibility. It's about the ideas themselves and whether they're challenged or allowed to grow quietly. And none of this means living in fear or acting like they control everything. But it does mean being honest about what they represent and why it matters. Because ignoring it or pretending it's harmless doesn't make it go away. It just gives it more space to exist without being questioned. And if we actually care about a society where people can live with dignity and respect, then we have to recognize that movements built on exclusion and hate don't just stay contained. They affect how people treat each other, how communities function, and how rights are protected or taken away. And that's why it's not just a difference of opinion. It's something that directly clashes with the idea of fairness and humanity itself. This is where it gets real complicated real fast, because emotionally a lot of people will say yes, ban them, shut it down completely, no room for hate. And honestly, that reaction makes sense when you look at what the KKK stands for and the damage tied to their history. But in reality, in a country like America, it's not that simple, because the same laws that protect people's right to speak, organize, and exist without government shutdown also apply even when the ideas are ugly, offensive, or dangerous. And that's the tension people don't always want to sit with. Because freedom of speech isn't designed to only protect the things we agree with, it protects the things we don't like too. And once you start giving the government power to ban one group based on beliefs, even hateful ones, you open the door for that same power to be used in other ways later on. And that can backfire hard depending on who's in control. So the question isn't just, should they be banned? It's also, what kind of power are we willing to hand over, and how could that be used in the future? And at the same time, none of that means people have to tolerate or accept what the KKK stands for, because there's a difference between something being legal and something being right. And society has other ways of pushing back, through laws against violence and threats, through education, through people speaking out, organizing, voting, and making it clear that hate doesn't represent the majority. And honestly, that kind of pushback can be more powerful long-term than just trying to erase something, because it forces the truth into the open instead of letting it hide and grow quietly. So yeah, it's frustrating, because it feels like something so clearly harmful should just be shut down. But the bigger picture is about protecting a system where rights apply across the board, while still actively challenging and rejecting the ideas that try to tear people down. And that balance is messy, but it's part of what keeps a society from sliding into something even worse.